He wasn't suggesting they should not be rewarded, just highlighting where the largest reward lay. Nature has been using carbon for millions of years to make everything work. This is about what follows carbon. These are your factors of production. All of us here today are 18% carbon. Carbon is the building block of all life, be it grass, soil microbes or cattle. If you look at the slide again, carbon is responsible for keeping all life functioning. What I am saying is that carbon builds and maintains grass and cattle. My simple message: no carbon, no cattle. The carbon comes down from the atmosphere into plants via photosynthesis and then gets passed along the food chain to cattle. Plants also supply the food chain under the soil that restructures the soil and makes it productive. These were the issues that Tony was really looking into. I spent 30 years running a grazing operation and nobody ever told me that my day job was managing carbon. It is unfair to be critical of rural producers for not understanding the importance of carbon in the natural processes that occur in their paddock. They haven't been getting the information until very recently. Extension agencies, industry advisory bodies and rural consultants are still trying to get their heads around the true importance of carbon management. The book Carbon Grazing, The Missing Link, was written prior to 2007. It highlights that carbon management is the basis of land management and increased profits. It also links carbon into all the environmental outcome. And one of the advantages of that is that it actually gives rural producers some evidence to get the greenies off their back. So I suppose it's good legal scientific proof. The book explains how methane emissions could be reduced at no cost to rural producers. At the same point in time, when the book was written, I was fortunate enough to view the content of the MLA publication on grazing land management. Unfortunately, the word carbon did not appear once in the entire text. This is not a criticism, but rather a statement of fact. This GLM course represents what was seen as relevant at the time. This 2-year time frame highlights how quickly things have changed. And that's why I'm really pleased you guys have turned up today, because you're obviously aware that things are changing. From where I sit and read, it is obvious that there is a lot of scaremongering in this whole carbon debate. As landholders, you simply need to be supplied with facts. Being armed with these facts allows you to make rational and informed decisions. I ask you, please don't have a closed mind to carbon because of the negative perceptions of others. With information, whether or not it is acted on depends on the beliefs you hold. Getting back to the basics, whether or not you believe in climate change determines how you plan for the future. We all have different understanding of what climate change means. For me, it means increased variability. Things are just a bit more extreme than they have been in the past. A good example is the time between rainfall events. I'm not here to tell you whether it is human-induced or just a cycle of nature. What is important is how you adapt to what appears to be changing circumstances. Even if it is just a cycle of nature, as some of you think, you must plan a response. Personally, I do think something has changed. Not long before I left the land in 2000, old-timers were admitting they were getting confused by the patterns. Bill Ray from Gundawindi, who is now in his 80s, highlighted that in the past it would rain up this way and then a few days later in his area it would rain. He said those patterns don't exist any longer. Recently, a friend took me to a higher understanding. He suggested that the climate is more random. I'd much prefer to be faced with increased variability than randomness. Why would randomness cause chaos? The simple answer: agriculture relies on patterns to be successful. Two good examples are when to plant and when to harvest, and when to join and when to wean. Some cropping areas are now going to be forced to return to grazing. This is because annuals are not as successful as perennials in coping with a variable climate. Put simply, these people are growing annuals in a perennial environment. Scott Marler from Hillston in central west New South Wales explained to me recently that he was still getting the same average rainfall. However, It was now falling at a different time. More of it was falling in summer, which is why his winter crops are now failing. He feels he's now getting more of a Burke pattern. Our economic structures are set up to cope with a certain amount of risk. If, for example, the time between El Nino shortens, then the level of risk increases. One part of New South Wales has just had 7 crop failures in a row. This is completely outside the pattern since settlement and now has to be factored into risk management. The late Peter Cullen highlighted that how we view climate determines how we plan and make decisions. If you see a long dry spell as a drought, then you plan for when it breaks. However, if you see it as part of a changing climate, you then make different decisions. You plan differently. There is one point I would like you to consider. The people who ignore the possibility that the climate is changing are overlooking the need to put in place better risk management. It's not important what's causing it. I really do believe something is changing. You often hear the comment, when things get back to normal. The purpose of today is to ask ourselves, what is normal? While speaking recently at a Landcare AGM, I asked a comment from those present. One person suggested that the wet 1950s and 1970s are still lingering in our memories as normal. Echoing Peter Cullen again, we farm to the average and treat the extremes as bad luck. He suggested we need to farm more towards the extremes and treat the average as good luck. Not only do changed climate patterns stress economic structures, they also place more pressure on the landscape. This brings me to why I was invited here today. Colleen asked me to discuss ways you can reduce the impact of climate change on your business. The crux of what I'm going to say is that you have to increase the resilience of the landscape. By the end of the talk, there are some key messages I want you to take home. Now, why resilience is important. When anybody talks about adapting to climate change, ask them what adaptation means. The question has to be asked, are we concentrating too much on our response to the changed circumstances, in other words, being reactive, instead of trying to reduce the effect of a changing climate, in other words, being proactive? A resilient system provides a capacity to absorb changed circumstances. This is actually the easiest way to respond in the short term. Being able to absorb changes means they don't hurt us much. To quote CSIRO economist Dr. Leonie Pearson, the alternative of a resilient system is a vulnerable system. When a system loses resilience, it becomes precarious or fragile to change effects, and even small influences can have disastrous changes. This is where the image of resilience resides. Can anybody name the one thing missing on the left-hand side of the fence out of interest? Apart from the fact it looks like a damn sheep and it's not.
Feed.
Yeah. Well, I'll make it easy in case I get gonged off by Jerry over here. It's actually weight. It's actually carbon. The answer is lack of carbon compounds. I'm going to discuss what they are and how they can be returned.